It's not about, it's not about, it's not about the injury. It's not about, it's not about, it's not about the injury. It's about the recovery. It's about the recovery.
Hi folks, Paul Padda here with another episode of the Paul Padda podcast coming to you from Red Chimp Studios. Today, I'm really honored to have a special guest, someone that I've known about. I've followed your career. You're really an amazing person. I would say an informal historian of all things Nevada and a man who has just an encyclopedic knowledge of politics and people. Senator Richard Bryan, thank you so much for coming on our podcast
Oh,
today.
it's my pleasure. I think you've billed me a little bit higher than I should be, but I used to have an excellent memory about all things in politics in Nevada.
I got to tell you a story. So Patty Davidson, who's my firm administrator, she's a huge fan of yours. And she said, you know, one thing about Senator Bryan, there's some politicians who seem a little inauthentic. She says he's so amazingly authentic. He remembers everybody's name. He always remembers some detail about you.
Yeah.
And he'll bring it up in a conversation. So the last time I met you, I remember, we haven't interacted that much.
No.
But you remembered my name. You remembered where you had met me. We commented. I was like blown away by that. I said, "Wow, that is really impressive." I read a book about Bill Clinton where he would write down people's names and some detail about them on a note card, and he would study it over and over again.
He was amazing.
And he was amazing. So
Clinton
I think
was
you have
amazing.
that gift.
And he was very personable.
Yeah.
Even people that disagreed with his politics, and many did, were always amazed that this guy can talk to you just about everything. He may not be an expert, but I mean, he can carry on a conversation on just about any subject.
Well, there's so many things we could talk about today, but I just want to start with, I remember hearing you speak at the Mob Museum, and you were giving a conversation. It wasn't really a full-blown lecture, but it was a group of people.
Yes.
And I came to this event. Ruben Kewen had invited me there. And I remember you talking about the history of Las Vegas.
Yes.
And I was actually gripped by it because it was so fascinating. And many people, so I moved here from Washington, D.C., and I had a lot of friends say, "Oh, wow, how could you live in Las Vegas? What goes on there?" And I said, you know, this is actually, when I moved here, I thought, well, I'll spend a year here and move to California. My ambition was to get to L.A. And then something happened along the way. This city has a way of captivating you, and you fall in love with it. And I came to just love the city, the ethos, the attitude of people here, the can-do spirit, the idea that you can come here and you can make it. And there are a lot of towns, it's not that easy, right? There's families that go back several generations. We have that here, but what I find so wonderful about this state is how open it is in terms of welcoming people. So I would say Las Vegas is the quintessential city. It was built by dreamers, right? People came here. Tell us about that.
Well, I think that's right, Paul. You really, I think, hit on a point that not everybody understands. But in Las Vegas, the first question is not, now, how long have you lived here? What did your family do?
Yeah.
If you come to the community, express an interest in an organization or a particular activity, nobody's going to say to you, well, you know, you really have to wait your turn. So the synergy is the old families who really made the community were here in the very difficult years when literally Las Vegas was on the edge of the Mojave Desert. We didn't have any national profile at all, and they stayed here during very difficult times. And those families we respect. I knew many of them growing up here as a kid, but somebody could come in a year or two later, I mean, all of a sudden can be a member of the board of directors or even the president of an organization. So that's part of the dynamic that's made Las Vegas. And some of it, I think, maybe things were not always easy here. You know, there are some parts of the country where you're in a situation where everybody loves it. There's forests and rivers and streams and That's not Las Vegas.
Now, you were born in Washington, D.C.
I was indeed.
But your parents moved out here.
Yes. Yeah.
How old were you when you moved to Las Vegas?
I was 4.5.
Okay.
My dad had come here in 1926 as a senior in high school to live with his older sister.
Okay.
And her husband went to the University of Nevada, and it was in the depths of the Depression. And he didn't have any money, and he went to the University of Nevada, graduated in 1932, worked on the highway department. In those days, Paul, members of Congress had what they called a patronage appointment. In other words, it was on some kind of rotational basis, as I understand it. So not every member of Congress, we're talking about the Nevada delegation now, which we only had one congressman then. In fact, we only had one congressman until 1982. But you'd get an appointment, we could appoint an individual to an entry-level position in the federal government. The Senate staffs, congressional staffs were very small.
Yes.
But my dad had worked actively in a campaign, and he was fortunate enough, Congressman Scrugum, the only Nevadan to serve as governor, congressman, and United States senator. He'd worked on the campaign. I have pictures of him out on the campaign trail. Scrugum called and said, I have a position in the Department of Agriculture as a purchasing agent. My dad came back to D.C. in January of 1936, met my mother later in the year. They got married, and I was born in D.C. And when he finished law school, I came back here. So, Paul, we have something in common.
That's
we
right.
both came from Washington.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Different time.
Different time. Yeah. Now, growing up here, did you ever envision professional sports like the Raiders and hockey? I mean, it's such an exciting time in many ways to be in Las Vegas. The growth and the explosion in this city. What do you make of all of this?
It really is. Well, it's obviously changed the dynamic of the community. You know, in the 1940s, and that's when I was a kid growing up, nobody paid the NFL. You know, baseball was truly America's pastime. Soccer was not here. Hockey, I mean, if I even knew what it was, you know, something that was totally alien. But most every kid on the block knew that Babe Ruth's, hit 714 home runs, that Ty Cobb's lifetime batting average was 367. And I was crazy about Stan Musial. That was probably the furthest west professional baseball. I mean, I say professional, I mean Major League Baseball. And so that's what we talked about. And of course, there was no television, and the sports played a much, much smaller role in the community.
Yeah, you know what attracted me to Vegas is I grew up in the Caribbean on a small island called St. Croix, and it was sort of there was this attitude that everybody kind of knew each other. But even though that's, of course, that wasn't true, but Las Vegas has that feel where it's a big city, big name, but still at its heart, it has that feel of a small town.
I think it does. It is a big, small city. I know that sounds paradoxical, but it really is. Although the city has grown rapidly, opportunity is here. There's a relatively small number of people who, to use a very trite expression, are kind of the movers and shakers. And you see a lot of each other in that sense. Now, of course, as a lawyer, I mean, I think when my dad was admitted to practice, there may have been 20, 25 lawyers in Las Vegas. That had been 1943. I was admitted 20 years later.
You can't drive a mile without seeing 20 billboards now with lawyers.
That's right. Well, as you recall, it was considered unethical.
Right.
Lawyers could not. In fact, Paul, this is a bit of trivia. As a newly admitted lawyer, you're saying, okay, look, Brian, you're going to serve on the administrative committee, and we dealt with ethical issues. Believe it or not, we had matters before us in which the size of a lawyer's sign became an issue. And we would tell the lawyer, that's too big, you're implicitly advertising. That's a long tangle. There were a number of those, They weren't billboards, Paul, they were just very large signs. And the bar felt that was at least indirect advertising.
Now let's focus on your career because it's so unique. I mean, you've been my understanding is you were the first public defender in Clark County, which is very interesting, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Then you became the Attorney General.
Actually, served in the legislature for 10 years.
Sorry.
Paul,
Yep.
Assembly 2 sessions, and
Okay.
the Senate 3, and then Attorney General.
Then you became Attorney General,
Right.
then the governor of the
Yes.
state, and then a 2-term United States Senator.
You've got it.
That's amazing. How many people? I don't think there's anybody that can match that record in this or anywhere else.
Well, I guess one could say I don't know that any Nevadan has been Attorney General, Governor, United States Senator, but
yeah.
certainly, Brian Sandoval, our immediate past governor.
Yes.
I mean, he was in the state legislature. He was the Attorney General in the executive branch, and he was a federal judge. So I think he could probably say that he is the only governor in the history of the state that served in the executive branch, legislative, and judicial branch. So we've all got our own little niche in life, Paul.
So let me ask you, as a former public defender, what do you make of all this discussion now, conversation, advocacy, whatever you want to call it, about criminal justice reform? There's a big discussion going on where people feel, the criminal justice system has kind of moved too much towards punishment and not enough, and there needs to be something where it goes back a little bit towards rehabilitation. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think the one thing, I think all of us have kind of understood that sometimes it's who you know.
Yeah.
That the criminal justice system has historically treated people differently, and I think virtually every fair-minded, open-minded person would have to acknowledge that if you're an African American in so many communities across the country, the treatment that you get is much different. And
that is such an incredibly honest and authentic thing for you to say, because especially someone with your stature and background, you're acknowledging what so many people feel, but
you just can't deny it.
But a lot of politicians or people with they don't say that. They kind of dance around this idea, and they have this. They want to say that we have a perfect system. It's not.
It's not. It's not. Remember the preamble: in order to form a more perfect union. Well,
yes.
I have to say that America and the dream that made it possible for me and millions of others is not replicated any place in the world. Yeah. This is truly the land of opportunity.
I agree.
That is not to say that we're perfect. And when we're dealing with the criminal justice system, clearly not every police officer is abusive or racially biased.
Right.
But I must say, I certainly was aware of that to some extent. But I must tell you, in the last 6 months, what I've seen, frankly, Paul, has shocked me.
Well, when I saw that video in Rochester, there was an elderly man, he was in his 70s, and he was pushed down by a young police officer who was obviously very fit.
Yeah.
It just offended my sense of decency. Like, it's one thing, but even just put aside the fact that, you're a police officer, that's a civilian. How about the fact that you're a younger man and this is an older man? Who would treat anyone like that?
Exactly. And having said that, Paul, I don't think it's inconsistent to say that the circumstances that we've discussed here, that we acknowledge freely, doesn't mean, for me at least, well, we'll defund the police department.
No, that's crazy.
That's crazy.
Whoever picked that terminology needs to take a marketing course.
That is just crazy. We need law enforcement. Do we need a better oversight in terms of an impartial review board to determine where there are alleged instances of police misconduct? My view is that we do.
Yeah. And I was a former federal prosecutor. I have a lot of friends who are police officers. And a lot of them are very pained by the idea that they get lumped in with some bad officers. And it's a tough job. You pull up in the middle of the night, you got to pull someone over on the road. You don't know what you're dealing with. And so I have a lot of respect for people who put on the uniform.
I do too.
But at the same time, every profession has some form of regulation and oversight. The idea that they're beyond reproach is a little silly. There needs to be reform, as you say. I agree with that. Moving on to another topic.
Yes.
What do you make of I get this is a very open-ended question, but it seems to me, and everybody says every election is the most important election in our lifetime, but I just feel as a citizen, this is such an important time. I don't know if there's you want to call it an existential choice. On the one hand, we have someone like Joe Biden. On the other hand, you have the president. There seems to be so much cynicism in America today about politics, about political leadership. Where are we culturally as a country where people can't even have conversations anymore? As someone who worked in the Senate during a time when Republicans and Democrats were friends, and I lean to the left, but I admired some Republicans, people like Alan Simpson from Wyoming and other senators. And so how do you view all of this, like in terms of your experiences?
Well, let me tell you that when I went to the State Assembly in 1969, Harry Reid and I were two freshmen. There was not a Republican caucus and a Democratic caucus in the Assembly. The caucuses did not raise any money. No one would have suggested, well, wait, this is a caucus issue. We've got to vote, even though you may not agree with it. Some of my very closest friends were young Republicans from Washoe County. Two urban areas. We had a lot of common interest. And it was wonderful. There was almost no partisanship. That has changed at the national level, and I must say, from the national level, it's trickled into the state legislature here in Nevada and elsewhere. The polarization is not good for the country.
It's not good.
And the notion that somehow compromise is a bad word. I cite the founding fathers. I mean, when they met there at Philadelphia, you know, the representatives of the large states, as we all know from our civics when we're in grade school, favored representation in the legislative chamber by population. The less populous states were very concerned about that they would be overwhelmed. And the Great Compromise, the compromise that allowed the United States of America to come into existence, was a product of the Great Compromise. Somehow we've lost the notion that you can compromise, give a little here, get some reciprocal consideration. I think that's, with respect to the national level, I'm concerned about our democracy. Maybe that's just, as an older man, but I'm very concerned about it. I mean, things that are occurring now, no Secretary of State in the history of the Republic has addressed a national convention of his or her party. The White House has never been used, as a forum for accepting a nomination. These were political norms. For decades now, every presidential candidate has, let his tax records be available. And you can go on and on and on. All of these executive orders, I think many of them are questionable. And frankly, some of the Obama orders have been questioned as well. But that concerns me. And what troubles me greatly is the president has kind of sowed the seed of doubt that, look, as he said, if I lose, the election's been stolen from me. To instill that kind of notion. Because one of the great characteristics, one of the great characteristics of the American political system is the succession. In other countries, you have coups, you have military dictatorships taking over. We've had a rather smooth transition. I mean, it has not always been easy. In 1800, we had some trouble. In 1876, we had some trouble. And in 2000, many of your viewers will recall the hanging chads.
That's right.
In Florida. So that's not to say that everyone, but by and large, it's been resolved peacefully. But one thing that I've thought about, I was not a big supporter of Richard Nixon. I came of age and voted for Kennedy. But there were a number of ballots that were cast, particularly in Illinois, that were highly questionable. Nixon made a statement that, look, he felt that those ballots have been cast, questionable, perhaps illegal, but he said it was really more important for the transition to occur for the country. Now, this is a guy that's not my idol, but I mean, putting the country first ahead of himself. Somehow I think we've lost that. The other thing that's so troubling is an absence of civility.
You hit the nail on the head there.
I ran against an incumbent governor, Bob List. He and I were political rivals, not political enemies. In other words, there was no personal animosity. We'd gone to law school together. My daughter and his daughter were good friends when
Right.
we moved to Carson City.
Yeah.
That when I ran for the Senate against an incumbent, there's no personal animosity. It's the absence of civility. You could agree to disagree.
Sure.
And that is of concern to me because we need the ability to. Part of it may be cultural. In other words, I grew up in an era in politics before social platforms and computers.
Right.
You talk to people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a lubricant, it seems to me, because you talk face to face like we are now.
Yeah.
I can see your expression, you can see mine. Sometimes, as as the lawyers describe it, non-verbal communication.
That's right. Yeah.
Gestures,
Sure.
eyes,
Yes.
smile.
People don't know
expressions.
who their neighbors are even anymore.
No.
And we live in an increasingly isolated age where
Yes.
we have so much technology, we have so much access to other people, but none of it's personal.
No.
People talk about all their Facebook friends. They're not real friends. They're
No.
just people on Facebook.
No, exactly.
And so I agree with what you're saying is that, if you have crazy views, well, now you can find 50 other people that share those views.
Yeah.
And that thing morphs into something else. And some of these crazy conspiracy theories that have developed, the cultural discourse where, you're almost celebrated for being as boorish as you want to be, as anti-intellectual. It's almost considered a positive attribute almost. And that's just where I agree with you, is that as much as we've advanced technologically, you have more access to information now than you ever have before. It seems like there's more ignorance that's prevailing, and something has broken down along the way where it's really unfortunate, and it's seeped into our politics.
It has, with all of the wonders of the internet. And I'm certainly not a neo-Luddite and saying, look, the world was better before we had computers. But one thing is true, that social platforms and the internet, things that never would have been given any public because they were so outlandish, ridiculous. Today, you'll find an internet platform, a social platform, where those views are acceptable. And what I found, even in my days, and it certainly was not as polarized as it is today, somebody would stop you, or you'd have a town hall meeting. I love those. A lot of back and forth. But oftentimes people would think that their view was shared by everyone.
Yeah.
And I tried to. I used to say this, and I didn't have any town halls that are as rough as today, but I said, with all due respect, I differ with you. And I said, Mark Twain, who spent his early days in Nevada, said that if two men agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary. And I would say, sir, I don't think you are unnecessary. I hope you would accord the same view of me.
Yeah.
But those kind of things, that's not internet. That's person-to-person conversation.
Absolutely.
No, I didn't change his view, and he didn't change mine.
Right.
But there was a civility to it.
Yeah.
And, after these things, sometimes you'd come up and shake your hand and say, I think governor, senator, whatever, I think you're dead wrong on this, but I appreciate the fact that you come out and hear what I had to say.
Yeah.
And that's the
lost.
way that's the way I'd like to see it.
I agree with you. So now let me ask you a question. There's a lot of discussion about the Electoral College, and you mentioned a little bit about how our founding fathers set up our democracy. And it was about representative government. Many people feel now the Electoral College has gotten to the point where people's votes are being diluted. It should, this concept of one person, one man or woman, one vote, your vote counts. Well, if I live in California and I'm a Republican, my vote doesn't really count. If I'm a Democrat and I live in Texas, well, my vote doesn't really count. What do you make of this what seems to me to be a movement that's starting, at least on the Democratic side, where people are questioning whether we should have the Electoral College? What do you say to that?
Paul, I think my view is evolving on that, and I don't say that in a political sense. I have always supported the Electoral College, and I must say that's obviously from a self-interest as a state, not personally, but a small state like Nevada, which at one time had only 3 electoral votes, 2 senators, 1. I always felt that the Electoral College gave us a place at the political table, so to speak.
Protection.
That when we had 110,000 people in the entire state, no presidential candidate's going to stop by, because there are more people than that in a suburban in Los Angeles. I must say in recent years, I've been troubled. I believe that Hillary Clinton got something like 4 million more votes.
That's right.
Than President Trump. That's not quite right. Mm-hmm. So as I say, my view is evolving. I still think from a small state's point of view that there's something to be said for that. But it is increasingly difficult to say that a majority of Americans have expressed their preference for president, and the majority vote does not prevail.
So I was reading, I can't remember what the source was, but I thought it was a good proposal, which is that the winner-take-all concept in the Electoral College does not make sense. It's not fair. So let's say California has, just hypothetically, however many votes, let's call it 100.
Yeah.
If a Republican and a Democrat, let's say the Republican gets 40%, the Democrat gets 60%, well, the Republican should get 40% of the 100 electoral votes. And that would be more proportional, so that, in other words, you could literally be competitive in every state as a candidate, as opposed to this winner-take-all system.
Yeah, that may have some merit. I need to think about that, but it doesn't go as far as eliminating the Electoral College.
Yeah.
But it does. It does not dilute the vote.
What it means is that you have zero chance as a Republican in California and zero chance as a Democrat in Texas.
Yeah.
That if you get 40% of people in Texas to vote for you, well, you're not out of the race. You're going to get 40% of that state's electoral vote. So maybe that's a solution. I don't know. What do you say to people now who, I talk to a lot of young people who say, you know what, I don't believe in the system. My vote's not going to count. It's not going to matter who I vote for. I'm one person. Like, if I go and vote on election day, well, how is that really going to affect democracy? And I know what the answer that you're going to give, but what do you say to those people who have that level of cynicism? And it seems to me we have a lot of those folks out there.
We have a lot of cynicism, and there's certainly examples of extraordinarily serious misconduct by some.
Yeah.
I never ever got mad, Paul, at somebody that disagreed with me. Mm-hmm. I did get mad when people would say, you're like all the politicians.
Yeah.
You're dishonest.
That's right.
I was not able to control myself there. It's hard, I know, for people. My view is that the great majority of people that represent us at each level are honest. There is no question. There are some who have violated their public trust. I mean, to the extent that you don't participate in the system, you're not going to be able to change it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so there are instances in this last presidential election, something like 10 or 11,000 votes. I think it's in Michigan.
Yeah. That decided the whole election.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And so your vote does count. It does count. And I would hope people would get involved. My father had a wonderful expression that I heard many times growing up. He said, we all have an obligation to pay our civic rent. And by that, he meant there's much that we receive.
Yes.
And we have an obligation. Doesn't mean that everybody has to run for public office, get involved with your church, the community organizations, or whatever your passion is, but get involved in the community, be a part of it.
I like that phrase, civic rent. That's a great,
I'm not saying it was original, but I certainly used it many times.
Oh yeah, I agree. Well, and I think that's it. We had a civil rights movement in this country. We had a civil war in this country. We've had a women's suffrage movement in this country. The idea that so many people sacrificed so much to make sure that everyone had the right to vote, and that people take it so casually today as if it's something that, well, I'm not going to exercise my...
But the examples that you cite is how the country has evolved into a better country. Originally, property ownership was a condition.
Yeah.
Obviously, African Americans were not given the vote. Women were not given the vote. We've come a long way. And for those who, with this controversy about every statute of somebody that one time was a slave owner, I think people need to give some understanding, as we used to say, cut them a little slack. You're a product of your times. When I was in the United States Senate, the issue of, gays in the military surfaced. And those of us that wanted to open the military up supported don't ask, don't tell. In the idiom of the politics of today, that was a progressive position.
Right.
Today, clearly.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean those of us, who voted for that were homophobic. I mean,
of course
we've evolved. I mean,
that's right.
The public has accepted gay marriage, by and large, not everybody.
Yeah.
But that's an evolving thing. And so the history of America, the evolution has been, by and large, positive.
I agree.
Not perfect.
Yeah.
And there's
it's still the best country in the world.
There's just not even close.
Nothing is close. No. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the rights that people have here, and the fact that we have this discourse that's always ongoing. And you're right. We all evolve. So now I want to talk a little bit about your Senate career, because there's two things that are interesting to me. One, a lot of people get credit for Yucca Mountain and keeping all of that waste out of here, but you were actually the original person who opposed it vigorously and delayed a lot of the storage of and that had an effect in terms of later years of preventing a lot of that.
Yeah, and then Senator Reid, when I came to the Senate, he was very, very, very supportive. Well, I mean, originally the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, without getting in, was going to search the entire country. We'd look at the right kind of geological formations. 3 sites would be submitted to the president, and the president would decide. Well, it became politicized almost immediately. Nevada didn't have the political clout that it later had with Senator Reid and others who have served us. And so the so-called Screw Nevada, the only state that we will look at.
Yeah. And,
I was governor at the time and got very energized, and with Senator Reid. And Bill Clinton and I were governors, and we knew each other, and that helped. And obviously Senator Reid was very, very helpful. But the fight goes on.
Now, there's another aspect of your career I thought was fascinating, was that you opposed the SETI bill.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, what do you have against Martians? For those people who are watching and are not aware, SETI was NASA's program, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
You've got it.
And I read that Senator Bryan was the instrumental in killing this bill.
Oh, God.
We could be friends with the Martians right now if it wasn't for you.
Well, the cynics say, he's against the Martians because they don't vote. But
maybe you knew something. You knew they were all Republicans.
I was frequently vilified on, I think, X-Files was the program. But, I just felt that it was a program that, the private sector should fund and the feds should not. And so that was my view. I had never thought about running for the Senate. My dream when I was probably the 8th grade, I always wanted to be governor.
Yeah.
And I was so lucky, very lucky. The timing and just good fortune, wonderful parents, and a strong wife who loved the political world, and she was right there at every turn in the road. And I was able to live my dream. But going to the Senate was an experience. It was what I used to call kind of the frosting on the cake, because you're dealing with people at the national and international level, and that was remarkable. Probably the most difficult thing I undertook there, and it was very painful, is chairing the Senate Ethics Committee. And we forced Senator Packwood to resign.
I remember that. Yeah.
That was, the investigation went on for some period of time. It was behind closed doors. And so we were frequently criticized as, a rogue committee and abused a good bit. But I think it spoke well of the Senate as an institution because we did take action. And I think the Senate as an institution,
and in a bipartisan fashion.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And we were able to get that on, and that speaks well. And I think a lot of people thought nothing was ever going to happen with it. And again, the Senate is an institution. There was a time before I got there that, look, ladies, if you can't take this, you don't belong here in the Senate. I mean, you're going to get some of these old guys to give you a pat where you don't want to be patted, but hey, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Nobody makes that argument.
No.
It's just offensive as hell.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody. But there was a time.
There was a time.
That time has got another example where the American political system has gotten better.
Yeah. That's a great point. So to the young person who's watching, who's interested in politics, what advice would someone with your amazing background offer them? What words?
Come
of
on
wisdom?
in. Come on in. Stick your toe in the pool. I mean, there's so many avenues. There is no political campaign that ever was run in this country in which additional volunteers are not welcome. So my thought is, maybe there's a candidate of some interest to you, or maybe you're concerned about something that's happened on the school board, or, a zoning change that was made at the local government level. Get involved.
Yeah.
Get involved doesn't mean that you have to run for office, doesn't mean that you have to serve on a finance committee, but get involved. I think it would be a refreshing opportunity because there are a lot of good people on both sides of the political aisle.
I agree.
Who are trying to do the right thing.
Yes.
We may not agree how to do the right thing. My only caveat, I wish we could respect people whose views we don't like.
Yeah.
I mean, the president using these excoriating terms, it sets a bad example. You don't want your own kids to talk that way.
Yeah. I mean, I was calling Senator McCain a loser for being a POW. That is just, I was blown away by that.
McCain and I did not always agree. I was officed on the same floor, and many times as we're heading to the floor in our office building, he was it. And every time I was reminded, his left arm had like a crook.
Yeah.
Those were, debilitating injuries he received during the time that he was a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. Cannot everybody agree? You may disagree with the Vietnam War. Many did in retrospect. Many have said it was a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
But he was serving his country.
Of course, yeah. Anybody that puts on the uniform for this country should be respected.
Absolutely. I respect them. I was already out of the Army before Vietnam. And I think those that served in Vietnam took a lot of abuse when they came back.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a shameful episode in American history. Those people didn't make the policy judgment.
They did not. Yeah. They did what their country asked them to do. Yeah.
I served in the Army. I have to say, not because, God, it was a life passion, but every able-bodied man, was in all probability going to be drafted. University of Nevada was a land-grant institution. Right. You had to take 2 years ROTC. My dad in the 20s took 2 years. Another 2 years, and you got a commission. Paul, I looked at the salary. Second lieutenant made $222 a month.
My gosh.
Okay, but that was more than a PFC. And I was a single guy, and that officer's uniform looked a little better. Right. So, and I went as a second lieutenant, and 35 of us. It was a representation of college graduates in the year that I graduated in 1959. Yeah. From Harvard, from Stanford, from all over the country. It was a wonderful experience because, living in Nevada, I'd had very little exposure to people, but it was just a wonderful experience. Yeah. And I think it was helpful. Not that I became a military strategist. I did not.
Gave you a perspective.
But it gave you a perspective. I think it gave you some discipline. And frankly, looking back on it, I think that there was a subliminal lesson. You do have an obligation to do something for your country.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it was a good experience, and I look back on it, and I think I benefited. Now, the question is whether the Army, I would say to people I said, look, America was safer when I served. Paul, I never saw a shot fired in anger. I mean, I was in Indianapolis, Indiana, at Fort Benjamin Harrison.
Well, you've lived an honorable life. You served your country. You've engaged in so much public service and given back. And you're a great example of what we should all emulate, which is basically, I like the way you put it, civic rent. Yep. We can all make a difference in our own different way.
We can, each in our own way.
Each
with the talents that we bring into the arena. But Paul, I think Tom Brokaw was right about the World War II generation, the greatest generation.
Yeah.
Of my generation, we were the luckiest generation.
Yeah.
We benefited from our sacrifice. I mean, the economy was expanding as I was growing up. I was so very lucky. Nevada was relatively small, so someone like myself could make a bigger impact than maybe today. The amount of money that was running for public office was much, much less. So I'm just the luckiest guy that ever lived.
Well, we're lucky to have had you as our senator. Sir, thank you so much for coming on today's show. This has been so informative, and I know those of us, the folks out there who are watching, will learn a lot about history, about your background, about all your contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Well, folks, that's a wrap for another episode of the Paul Padda Podcast. Today we've had Senator Richard Bryan, an amazing man with an amazing history of public service to our state and our country. And it's been really, 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 truly an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, stay safe.